I now want to take you through what you've learned so far in kind of a practical approach. I'm going to model a new table now, but I'm going to actually put in some more time and effort than I did on the previous one. To start, I want to look at real tables. Anytime you go into the modeling process, it helps if you're researching and looking at what you're about to develop. You need to be able to understand what it is more than just from a base level where it's, hey, there's a top and there's legs, but actually looking at the construction. How is this put together? For example, on a table like this top has two separate portions. It then has the skirt underneath that has the leg incorporated as part of the skirt. As opposed to a table such as the one down here, where you've got the tabletop, and it looks like there's an extra section in there. And then there's the skirt underneath that is a complete skirt with the legs inset from the skirt, and along with supporting braces at the bottom of the legs so that they don't get bent and break off. And so it's important to take the time to do research before you start working on anything. It's a very important part of design, is understand where it is. Even if you're doing something fantastical later on, you need to understand what the real life equivalent would be so that you can make more informed decisions about its construction. Now for this example, I am going to pick one of these tables here. I'm going to actually pull this over and then just grab one and bring it over here. And I'm going to model this table out. So in order to construct this, once again, I'm starting with that rectangular cube. And then I can see that I'm going to need to extrude out to create this edge, extrude up and in so I can get that rounded form, and then extrude up one more time to get that top lip for the top of the table. From the bottom of this, I would need to extrude out, down, and in to create the skirt, and then I would extrude up to create that interior piece that aligns with the bottom of the table. Then I would come back and construct the legs. It looks like I can make it out of a cube, but I'm running into a design issue here. I'm going from a cube shape into a cylinder shape. Now with the cube and the cylinder, there are a few different ways I could approach it. I could just take a straight cube and then create a new shape of a cylinder and just put them together. Or I can actually have a cylinder that I create or move into the shape of being a cube at the top and then cylindrical through the rest of the form. So I'll show you both of those approaches really quick, but let's start by making the tabletop. So what I'm going to do first is I will create the cube and start pulling it out. Now, one thing I haven't done in previous videos that I want to point out now that's good practice is to save iterations as you go. That way, if there's any type of an issue or a problem that you run into, you're not losing all of your work. You're simply losing a little bit of it, going back to a previous save and making changes. So even at this stage, I can take this scene and go File, Save Scene As, and because I already had done a second table for something else, I can go Table _3 _1. And the reason I'm doing that _1 at the end is to show that this is an iteration, and that way I can save my work as I go. Now when I finish this, then I will only leave the table _3 here in the scene, or in the folder that has the scenes, and I will take the rest of the iterations and store them in a different folder outside of my project so that I can have them as a backup in case I need to go back to them. And so this is a good habit, especially because with long working hours, if you're working on a model for 5 or 6 hours and something happens like Maya crashes, you don't lose all of that work. You may only lose maybe 20 minutes or whenever it was until the last save. So it's very important to save iterations as you go so that you have backups. So with this tabletop, once again, I'm going to start by taking the top of it and I will extrude out. So I hit extrude and I scale this out. Now it scales up, but I want it to be equidistant from the sides. So I can do that either by using the grid to snap it into place and make sure it's even, or I can simply eyeball it, which is what I'm going to do in this case. It depends on what the model is for and how accurate you need to be. So with this extrusion out, I'll actually scale this up just a little bit more. I'm then going to extrude up. And bring that in just a touch, not a lot, but just a little bit right now. Extrude again, so I can get this slightly rounded form, and I took that up a little too high, so I'll bring that back down. Make sure I scale then this side as well so that it gets that nice smooth edge. I'm actually going to bring this in just a touch more so that it gets a little more of that rounding. Lower that down. And scale that piece out. If you notice, this is me just being finicky, but one thing I can do is scale it clear down and then it'll move a little bit more smoothly. Alright, now that that's in place, I'll do one more extrusion to bring this up. And so that's the top of the table that you saw right there. Now I'm going to work on that bottom portion. For this bottom portion, I'm going to bring this up just a little bit. Do an extrusion to scale that out. Bring it down first, grab it again so I have a little bit smoother time scaling that up. Extrude again to bring this down. And I want to scale that up again because it goes out to a little bit of a peak there. And this would be a good time to come into the top-down view so I can gauge those edges a little bit better. Okay, and so I want to take this out just a little bit further than it is. So once again, if I need to, I can scale it down. If it's already large when I grab these scaling handles, it tends to jump. But if I bring it down so those are close together, then when I scale, it takes smaller incremental steps. So scale that up. Do another extrusion. Bring this down. And this one I will bring in. And then I will extrude in from here. This time I do want to look in the top-down view. So I can bring it to the inside of where that skirt would be. I can then do one final extrusion to take this up. So holding down the V key, I will left click, and while holding down the left mouse, highlight this vertex I want it to align to. And so that creates that interior portion. Alright, and so I'm going to save this right now. File, Save Scene, and I didn't want to do it on the one. I meant to do Save Scene As. So what I would normally do is File, Save Scene As, and then I can do 3_2 to save a new iteration. Alright, so with this in place, I'm going to make a couple small changes. I want to grab these faces and scale them out just a touch further because I'm not happy with the way they're lining up. And I can start on the legs. So for the legs, as I pointed out, there are a couple of different ways I could approach it. I could simply start with a cube shape and then insert a cylinder into it. For this cylinder, there's a couple things I want to make changes with. First, this is far too high a resolution for what I'm trying to work at. In general, when you're modeling, you want to work at lower resolutions so that things are easier to manage and easier to deal with. Right now there's another issue of tri-fanning, which we'll cover later, and these being in triangles, but because I haven't covered the tools to resolve that yet, we're not going to worry about that at this moment. And so I could just take that up, grab these faces, and then do extrusions on the way down. And then when I combine the pieces together, you'll think of it as simply being a single leg. The way I do want to approach it, however, is that I want to actually create it out of a single piece. Yet again, this is a design decision that I'm making. It doesn't necessarily have to be the way that it always is. And so I will give this 8 subdivisions. For this top portion of it, I'm going to do an extrusion. And then I'm going to make this decision to bring these vertices out. So holding down the V key for snap to point, I will grab those. I will grab these. Doing the same thing over here. I will then extrude up to create that cube shape. And then I can delete that top. Actually, I'm not going to, because I want to point out one other thing. With this particular table, if you notice, this lines up right to the inside. So I don't know whether that means that this is actually a metal skirt and so it's just very thin-walled, or whether the table legs themselves have been carved away so only a portion of it comes up on the back side. Now, because I don't have that information, as long as visually I'm close, I'll be okay, but I can also make my own design decisions at this point, knowing what I do about tables, and I can actually make the decision to inset the legs slightly further. And that way I can say this has a wooden skirt and I'm just putting the legs a little bit further in for their support rather than having them quite so flush with the outside of the table. And so that's the decision I'm going to make as I line this up. And so yes, I will delete that top portion based on what I want to do with it. I'm then going to adjust my pivot. Because of the way I've constructed this, I'm actually going to need to start the construction from the top. So I'll hold down V, and then press the D key again to move that pivot into place. I'll hold down the V key once more to then align it underneath the table. And then when I scale it down, it will move from that point, so it's still aligned with the bottom of the table there, until I get it to a size that works for this table that I'm constructing. And by the way, I have a second screen over here so I can see what the table looks like while I'm working. I encourage you, if you can have a second screen, that's great. Otherwise, somehow pull up the image or reference that you're looking at on a regular basis so that you can have a better idea of what you need to do. All right, so with that table leg, that looks about right based on what I'm trying to do. I'm going to grab these bottom faces and I'm going to bring them up to start creating the shaping for the leg. Before I do, I will select both of these as objects. I'm going to delete by type history, modify, freeze transforms, and then save the scene in a new iteration. So now it will be 3_3. So I'm saving as I go. Okay, now I'll come back, select these bottom faces, do an extrusion in and down to create that little bit of a divot. Do another extrusion back out and down to start creating this ball shape. Expand this a little bit and bring it down. Do another extrusion down and bring this in. And if I want it to be exact, this is a good time to once again use snap to point. So if I want it to be absolutely exact, I could grab this, hold down the V key, and by grabbing these in specific directions, for example, I can grab this handle to move in 2 directions. Whoop. If I grab it correctly. And it's still moving up with snap to point. So never mind, I'll do it one at a time. Holding down the V key, grab a handle at a time. I could line it up exactly with this. And so you can take the time to do that, and there are times where that's necessary. For me right now, though, I'm just going to eyeball it again. Because that's all I really need to worry about at this point, is getting it visually close for this particular project. So in order to get this lined up visually close, I need to identify what my separate edge sections are. So this is the edge row, or the edge loop that I need to line it up with, which is the second one in. And grabbing those bottom faces, I can see that actually I had it pretty close. So I'll just leave it right on top of there. And then I'm going to take this whole thing, making sure that I select the correct faces, and move it up just a little bit to emphasize that transition to that divot there. And I will actually scale this in just a little bit to make sure that it looks a little bit more similar to the leg that I'm referencing. Once again, I can extrude down and in just a touch, and knowing what I do now, it's going to be this edge that I'm trying to line up with. Using the spacebar key to transition between the different sections, or between the different panels. Do another extrusion out and down. And this one I want to line up here. And actually I went too far. I went to that top of the leg. So I will bring that in just a little bit. And then I can extrude down another time. And it looks like there's not much scaling in between the leg from the top to the bottom, so I'm actually going to keep it fairly straight. And then I'll do 2 more of these shapes on the bottom. So I can extrude in to create that divot shape. And if I want to get it a little bit better, I can actually look at it from a side view. So divot in, extrude again. If I find this isn't lining up as well as I like, I can adjust this. Do another short divot. Out again. In again. And then one more to create this bottom edge of the table leg. Now I didn't bring it all the way down to the bottom because I was more worried about this scaling, which I will bring out. Bring this portion in just a touch more. This portion as well. And then I can grab all those faces and bring them down. And then to line this bottom portion up, I will select those very bottom faces, holding down the X key, snap to grid, so I can snap it right there into place. And now I've got a leg formed that works in the way I need it to. So you can see I'm modeling it off of this leg. Now, in order to get this into place, I'm going to adjust the pivot. So select the D key, holding down V, I will snap to the edge and then snap over here to this point. Hit the D key again. And now I can move it into place. by holding down the V key once more. So snap to point, I left click and drag to right here on the inside of the skirt, and do the same thing here so that it lines up right there. So once again, I'm making a decision to change the design a little bit so it's not lined up quite so flush, but I'm actually causing it to be inset. From here, there are a couple ways I can duplicate the leg. And I'm going to do two ways so I can also show you another portion of the rotate tool. For this next one, I will hit Control D and I'll move it over here. And to get it to line up correctly, I will hit D again. And while holding down the V key for snap to point, I will move this over to the corner, let go, hit D again, and now I can hold down the V key and snap that into the corner. So I kept the leg the same place, but then just moved it over by using the adjust pivot and then snap to point. For the next two legs, I'm going to change my tactic just a little bit. This is symmetrical, so if I do something with rotating it, it will still line up the way it needs to. The way I'm going to do this is by first duplicating that, so Control D to duplicate, and then I want to rotate this leg. Now I could just do it simply by going to rotate and typing in 90 degrees to be able to rotate it. Another way to do this is by using the rotate tool. So if I hit the E key to rotate, I can grab the handle and rotate it, and I apparently left the tool settings on, so let me correct that. By default, snap step is turned off, and so when I rotate, it just rotates freely, and so it's hard to get things to line up exactly unless you are going into something like the attribute editor and then typing in a rotation amount. But another way to do it is by using step snap. And so here under the modeling toolkit, I can come down here to step snap, turn it on. I can turn it to relative or absolute, and for this case I'll just turn it relative. And then I can put how much I want it to snap. So in this case, I changed it to 15, so it will snap to every 15 degrees. I will Control Z to undo that. I can also type in 45, and in this case, it'll snap step every 45 degrees. And Control Z to undo that. For the last one, I'm going to snap it to 90, because I know I need it to be an absolute 90 snap to get it into position from the original spot. So with snap step turned on, I will move, and by the way, snap step is also available for move and for scale. But with snap step turned on or turned off for the move, I will hold down the V key, left click, and then drag to get it into place on the inside of that skirt. I will now hit Control D to move this one more time. So I duplicate it with Control D, and now I'm moving it. And I want to snap rotate it again. So I'll hit E, and you notice the rotation snap is still on for that. So I will snap it to 90, and then I'm going to turn snap step off so I don't forget about it in the future. Go back to move, hold down V for snap to point, and bring it into place. All right, so now with all 5 of these pieces together, I'm going to edit, delete all by type history, modify freeze transforms, and go File, Save Scene As, and I'm going to save in the next iteration. Now the reason I'm deleting the history before I save it is because sometimes the history will become a little bit overburdened. It will have so much history that it will start trying to undo itself as you save. This becomes especially true when we get to the UV mapping portion of the 3D development pipeline. And so I'm just doing this out of habit, but I wanted to bring it up that it's a good habit to have. Before you save a scene, delete your history, clean things up so that you don't have problems down the road. That way you're not doing one massive delete history at the end, which might retain information that you don't necessarily want. So back to the cleanup process. This is all now put together. So I select those pieces, and before I combine them, I want to once again go Window, Outliner, to make sure that there are only those 5 objects there and not additional stuff. I can then go Mesh, Combine to make a single object, and you see those things there. So once more, Edit, Delete All by Type, History. In this case, it didn't clean out all of it. So these are what are known as empty nodes. So this is information that we don't actually want in the scene, so I hit backspace to remove that to help clean out the outliner. So with this shape selected, or the mesh selected, I will hit D, and then holding down the X key for snap to grid, I will move the pivot to the origin, select D again, and now I've got my object here with the pivot at the origin. I'll then open up the attribute editor, and once more, not naming the mesh, I want to name the transform, partially because it updates the mesh name, but also because that's the one whose name changes in the outliner, so it's easier to find later on. So name the object, or I've named the object, I've deleted the history. Just as a force of habit, I will also freeze the transforms, so modify, freeze transforms. And I'm not going to worry about the initial shading group or the Lambert one. Yet again, later on we'll need to worry about removing that and creating custom materials, but for now, don't stress about it. But I have a clean table that was built strictly out of the tools that you've already learned. So I encourage you, take the time right now to play around with the tools. Try seeing what you can develop just with using the Extrude tool, because you'll be amazed to find that there's quite a bit you can do just with this one simple tool. So for now, I will save this scene as an iteration. And then I'll also do a final save scene for the final Maya file that I would keep by removing the underscore number, and that's the one for this finished table.